Here we have the updated 8bitdo Ultimate, the latest addition to licensed Xbox controllers featuring Hall effect sticks. Priced at £39.99 British pounds here on Amazon UK and $44.99 on Amazon US, comes in a nice small box with a rubber USB-A to USB-C cable and 1-month Game Pass Ultimate code. It weighs 221 grams on my scale. Compared that to the standard series controller, which weighs 240 grams without the batteries. It's based on the Xbox thumbstick layout, but the shell is much wider and the grips are much smaller. Definitely feels very different in hand. I wouldn't say it's uncomfortable, just a different feeling controller. Depending on the size of hands, you might actually prefer this over the standard controller. We do have a very nice grippy texture on the back, which really helps with the grip of this controller, and I'd had no problems of controller slipping in my palms at all. The build definitely feels solid. There are no moving parts or any creaks or anything like that, and the surface treatment what they've used actually feels really nice. I would say this is definitely comparable to a standard series controller, so it's not going to feel any cheaper than that controller, but of course it's not competing with the very premium controllers like the Elite Series 2. Okay, we are going to do a polling rate test, and you will see that this is 250 Hertz and it's actually locked at 250 Hertz. So you can see 3.7 millisecond average, and I tried overclocking it, and every time it just gives, whatever the same thing no matter what you do. I do have a machine with the secure boot turned off, and I was able to overclock it to 1000 Hertz. It wasn't cutting out or anything, but the response time stayed the same. Now, I have noticed at times there is an issue with this controller that it gives very different results. It adds a lot of latency numbers. Now, I was thinking that it's potentially me, how I'm using it and stuff, but it's not. It's actually, depending on the connection, that you start getting a lot of, latency numbers added to it. And it's like 7 milliseconds every, 7-8 polls. And very difficult to recreate, and this is working really well right now, so it's showing it all the right numbers and stuff. But whilst gaming, I didn't notice any extra latency or whatever. The only right way to test this would be if we get that connection. So if we keep doing it and we find that time that it's adding extra latency, then try and do some gaming session with it. On Xbox, it did not show me anything. So if I keep doing the test here, you will keep seeing, these proper numbers. But yeah, that's something that I did notice, that at times it had added a lot of latency, where it was like 7, 7, 7, even 11, 11 and stuff like that. And the moment I connected a different controller, it didn't, the machine didn't have an issue, because at first I thought, oh, is my machine, is this something that's going on? But thankfully I can't recreate that right now. So it's actually doing it's showing the perfect numbers. And I did some latency tests of my own, and it's a really responsive controller on Xbox. Like, that's not just my test, whilst gaming as well. It really shows the controller is actually super responsive. So what that issue is on Windows 10, because I'm using Windows 10, is sometimes it happens. It's very difficult to recreate, and right now all the tests I'm doing, I can't recreate that. So just be on the lookout for that one. If you see all those extra latency numbers when you have a connected Xinput, see what your game experience is like that with, when that's happening to you. But for me personally, I don't think there are any latency issues on the controller whatsoever. So the onboard control options, we have this multifunction button that you can use to toggle through the profiles. And there are 3 onboard profiles that you can just seamlessly go through. And when no lights, LED lights are lit, you are in the standard mode, which will have dead zone applied and stuff. But one thing this function button allows us to do is change the volume of the headset that's connected when you're on the Xbox. So if you press and hold, press down, it will decrease the volume of your headset. Pressing up will increase the volume, and you can go through headset chat mix as well. Left and right will do that for you. One thing I'm having issues with this controller is the mic monitoring. I haven't been able to enable that because we have a mic mute switch on the controller. So on Xbox, you don't get any options for muting your mic or anything like that. But it's something that I noticed that it's just, I couldn't get the mic monitoring to work. No matter, I used 2 different headsets, and both had the same issue. No mic monitoring working. I'm hoping it's just my unit or whatever is going on, or maybe there's a firmware update, but currently, as of testing this controller, making this review, mic monitoring didn't work. There is one extra button, which is the star button. You can assign a different function to it, like any of the face buttons onto the star button, but as standard, it has the swap feature. What the swap feature is, if you press and hold 2 buttons and press the star button, this LED light blinking means that their feature have been swapped now. So X is Y, Y is X. And to disable that, you have to press and hold them again and press the star button. And when it stops blinking, that means they're back to their original ones. It's a very unique feature. I haven't come across this on any other controller, But if you wanted this star button doing anything else, like D-pad input or whatever, you could actually assign that in the software. So here's a quick look at the app. It's available on the PC and Xbox. Right now, I am showing this on my Series X. And you have 3 different profiles that you can customize. And that's like the first page. Changing these profiles don't actually change them on the controller. You have to use the multifunction button on the controller. But let's say if I wanted to edit the profile too, I can use the bumpers to go through the different tabs. The button tabs allows you to change any function of any of the face buttons or disable them. And one unique feature this one has, so you can actually assign the back buttons. So you can actually assign a thumbstick press to one of the back buttons and disable the thumbstick press on that actual thumbstick button. You will still have the mapping of the thumbstick press at the back button, or you can assign a different press on the thumbstick and it will stay. So your back button will do the thumbstick press, and if you assign A to your left stick, it will actually do the left stick, press A when you press the left stick. Very unique feature, and if you want to disable them, of course, you can disable them. That star button, which seems to be doing a swap feature. Again, you have the swap feature is only available to the star button, and if you want to disable it, you can disable it or assign any of the other buttons to that. One other thing the back buttons do, they allow you to map your menu and view buttons to the back as well, which is sometimes missing on some cheaper controllers, but it's there. When we come to the sticks tab, this gives us a lot of options, so we can actually disable the dead zone. So they don't have, if you don't check this one, it feels like it's got a 10% dead zone applied, but you can actually disable them. And here we have the 4-way D-pad option, which is a really decent option. So if you're playing FPS games, you don't want any accidental actuations of the top D-pad when you're pressing right. So you can actually check that. So it's a 4-way D-pad only. And that actually works really well. And then we have these options. So once you disable the dead zones, you can play around with these. So that's kind of like, gives you a little bit of a dead zone, like the first 3 values won't do anything. And so if you see, like I have a 5 register there, if I start increasing that by percentage, by F5, it will go to 0. And reducing the max will basically change the whole, so it will make the 100% register at 90, and it maps basically everything within actually gets mapped for the 90 active area. So it's not like you get to 90 and it becomes 100. You will have 90 till 94, 5, whatever, and then it will become 100. So basically the whole active area just gets smaller. Very nice features here when it comes to thumbstick. Definitely disable the dead zones. Another thing I really found very interesting, so we have the calibrate options, and if we do the calibration, what you can do, you can actually change the center point of the stick. So this, at the moment, you have to start calibration by pressing a button. But let's say your stick have a drift towards the top, right? So what you can do, if you just hold it at 5 there and press the A button, that top will become the center, which is a very unique feature. Again, games have like a manual calibration thing, but this one actually you can adjust the center point as well if you want to. And triggers, again, we have those minimum and maximum dead zones. You can calibrate them as well. You can swap them around. Now, one thing that's a little bit different here, you can only assign the maximum minimum within the 10 different levels. So it's not like I can do just like 5 levels. So it's basically you have to do, so if I have that one selected here, then the next one will be 11. I don't know why it's this way, but that's just how it is. And it's something that I noticed straight away that I couldn't, make them any smaller, but they work really well. If you are just quick tapping with the 1 and 11 that I've done, it works really well. They don't have any hair trigger options like the games here, so that's missing here. And then whatever changes you do, you actually have to remember to sync to device, otherwise it doesn't take it. And vibration is just something that you can play around with different motors that they have and change their intensity. An update is, if there is an update, you have to check for it. If there is an update available, it'll do it for you. So just a quick overview of the software. The ABXY buttons are using the membrane switches, and the actuation force feels very nice. Not much wobble on the button, and the presses feels a bit quieter than the standard controller, which I do believe is a plus. But they are a little bit smaller than the standard controller. It's something I noticed, especially going from the stick to the Y button. But once I got adjusted to it, it's not a big hindrance, and I do think these are very good quality membrane ABXY buttons. So we have a 4-way D-pad, which is also using membrane switches. They do feel very soft to me. And luckily we have options in the software to just make it a 4-way D-pad. Whilst playing Call of Duty, I didn't have any accidental actuations. But if you're playing fighting games or any other games where you do have to use the D-pad a lot, I'm not sure if this is going to be like the best experience. But for FPS games, this was absolutely fine for me once I enabled the 4-way D-pad option in the software. The triggers are a little bit different than the standard series controller. They remind me a lot of the DualSense triggers. We don't have any trigger stops, but the matte paint they've used on the triggers actually feel really nice under the fingers. And the resistance is quite nice, so it's not something that you'll be accidentally actuating. And we do have some software options, although a little bit limited, the range that you can set minimum and maximum to. They absolutely worked perfectly for me. I wish they did have trigger stops, but it is what it is. At least we have some software options. The bumpers again have the matte feeling paint like the triggers, and they really surprised me because they're using membrane switches here, which potentially can make them a good option for aim and shoot. Because with the tag switches, we don't know what sort of life cycle rating they have, because they can vary from 100,000 to 2 million. Membranes tend to last a lot longer than the cheaper tag switches. So I do think that's a big advantage of this controller. I personally stuck to the triggers for aim and shoot because just the way I was gripping the controller, but it's definitely a possibility for somebody to use the bumpers for aim and shoot. Whilst using them in game, I have to say they performed really well. Every time I moved from the triggers to bumpers, they were very easy to actuate and they responded exactly when I needed them to. So I would say triggers and bumpers actually is not a bad experience at all. So we have only 2 back buttons on these controllers, and I have to say they are placed really well within the grips. I do wish they had some sort of a grippy texture on them, but having the texture on the grips really contrasts well with their plain sort of surface, so you can easily distinguish between them. I have to say, whilst using these, I had no accidental actuations, and their placement is so well that every time I needed to actuate them, it was so easy to press these, and they are very responsive. Needing to use them for anything in-game worked absolutely perfectly. I do wish somehow companies at this price point bring us 4 back buttons design for a 2 back button controller. I do think these are really, really good. The physical thumbsticks are very different on this one. So the feel in the center is sort of like slippery with slight grip. The edges have a very nice texture of grip, so I do think they feel very nice. But what they've done here is these are not as small as the Xbox sticks and not as big as the PlayStation one. So you can actually fit a Xbox control freak with some force, and you can have a PlayStation control freak as well. Now the Xbox one will be a lot more secure. The PlayStation one will move a little bit, but actually works really well. So it's like as if 8-bit decided that, oh, their customers can either buy the Xbox Control Freak or PlayStation and both will work. But if you are not using any Control Freaks, I do think these are very good design, you know, the material they've used, and I don't think anybody will have any problems with them. I do wish the center, instead of, you know, having that really sort of, it's like a slip grip hybrid what they've done. I wish there was some texture, but overall, I have to say, really good design. There is one thing missing here, which seems like in the higher model that they've used is the anti-friction rings. So no anti-friction rings on this one, but that didn't bother me at all, to be honest. They are not grinding that much. There is nothing happening to the shaft or anything like that. But I think at the price point, could have been a benefit, you know, having those anti-friction rings. But yeah, that's something missing. Physical thumbstick for me, not a problem at all. So we can actually truly disable the dead zones, and you will see the moment I move the sticks, we have that movement there. And that perfect center that you see in a lot of other controllers, the values that they have is because they, you know, there is some dead zone. That's thankfully that we have the ability of completely disabling them. Now, if I go to that base profile, you will see that perfect center appearing now. Now we have that 10% dead zone that sometimes, you know, controller use even 5% or 10% or whatever to get this perfect value. We have the ability to actually disable that. So if you are somebody, you want to use that, you can leave it on the software. So you'll have like around a 10% dead zone and it will always come back to center. But if you want to use with your in-game dead zones, yes, we finally, like, you know, we have that option available, which I think is a must. And then another unique thing these guys are doing, there is no outer dead zone. So it's just raw output. So however you calibrate them, and it'll basically just have that raw output going. And I personally think this is really good. And don't be alarmed, this is just a circularity. Even on the controllers that you have a perfect circle, you actually have that dead space where it's basically just registering out of the circle. The game is going to be reading that circle anyway. Now my controller will look like, oh wow, I have so much extra register, is because I opened this to see what sticks it was using, and then calibration, when I put it back on, the calibration is wonky a little bit, but recalibrating it, actually this is not that bad at all. And yeah, so unique feature that they haven't used any outer dead zones, and I personally think this is actually a benefit with this controller having a completely raw output. Checking the shape what the sticks are making within the maximum values on the joy tester, you will see this is that normal Hall effect stick shapes, like the K-Silver. All of my K-Silver sticks sort of make this kind of shape, apart from the Turtle Beast Stealth Ultra, which after the update started doing something differently. But they have outer dead zones, and so I was thinking that probably impacts that. This one doesn't have any outer dead zones and still makes that. Now, a normal standard potentiometer controller, depending on what sort of output they have, can actually make a circle within the 100 values. So that's normal here as well. Even having no outer dead zone didn't impact the output that much. But there is one thing I have to show you guys about these sticks. So what I'm showing here is basically a resolution map of what the sticks are doing when pushed from center to the edge. And of course, I wasn't able to do that by hand because you have to push them really, really slowly. So I had to use a motorized solution to get this data out, basically. And all essentially this is different numbers that are going up on Gamepad Tester when you are pushing the stick. So we are just taking all that data, putting it on a spreadsheet and see what we get. It's very difficult to read by hand because you have to make sure that it's not jumping through the resolution point. So you have to do it very slowly. So all the data I've collected is actually done through a motorized solution and not by hand. If you see what we have here, seems like not a very linear output at all. And this, I don't know what this is. So if maybe other controllers, so if I just show you what G7 SE does, this is something out of G7 SE. And imagine that, someone found this to be not linear enough, which if you look at it, it feels so linear, like it's just a straight line, but it does have deviations. And somebody out there actually felt that. So they were using a different controller and they felt that difference of that insert of a different value, not the same value. Now, if I show you guys the standard series controller, you are going to see that that's a similar behavior from a standard Xbox controller as well. It's not a exact value every time, but I think in the Xbox case, the differences are so small. We have so many zones. So doing a faster push, I would say. So the Xbox push was around, I would say, 5 seconds, 6 seconds, something like that. And we got 287 zones or something like that on the Xbox. So you understand that, it's a data like that. 8-bit. So I did this is like the super slow push. And this one took like 9 seconds. So imagine from center to the edge. I think it's like over 500 something. Yeah, so around 9-second push and only gave 109 zones it gave. 109 zones and all over the place. I did a sort of like a normal push, which was, again, it was slower. It wasn't like, 9 seconds, just normal like I was doing the Xbox. And this one gave us 101 zones. Again, the data, the values are not linear at all. And so here I have put all of them together. So like 3 different sort of pushes that we've done, and we're getting different values, like we're getting different zones out. So we get 115. This was the first one that I did, which is the blue one, that gave me like 114 zones. The red is the super slow one. So you can see like it's how slow that is, but in terms of, catching the zones, as if the speed you're pushing the stick matters in what output it does. So I don't know if other Hall effect sticks seems to be working this way, where they have like a set amount. If this is some interpolation, are they changing the data to get it to look like this? And what 8-bit is just doing, just sending the raw data out wherever the stick's supposed to be, just like whatever the thing is, and that's why we are not getting a very linear push. But this is something that I noticed. Now the controller is super responsive. It definitely hangs together with controllers that are very responsive in my tests. And whilst playing, I have to say this controller is extremely responsive. the sticks do feel like they perform to your command really well. Part of it due to the ability of completely zero dead zones, maybe, whatever. But I do think that, when it comes to response, it's amazing. But I have noticed a similarity between the 8-bit and the Xbox Series controller, the standard controller, because I was trying to play with this yesterday. At times, it feels like you have an extra input. That's the only way I can describe it. It's not lagging or whatever. You just feel like, oh, you overshot your target, or something that you do that feels like, okay, did you mean to put that much data, the sort of register out? That's the only way I can describe it. Now, if you are using a standard series controller, I don't think you will have a problem. But if you are somebody who's using a DualSense controller, which seems to be like very linear, but have much larger zones, you might have an issue, because this one, 8-bit, actually has lesser zones than a standard DualSense controller. So it's not as high resolution as an Xbox controller, yet it has the output like what the Xbox sticks are doing at much higher resolution at a lower resolution. So I don't know if this is going to be an impact or how you would feel about it. If you are somebody who's using other Hall effect sticks and they have a very linear output, you're definitely going to feel a difference, in my opinion. I got adjusted to it pretty quickly, and I have to say I did have a really, really great time using this controller. So for me, I think response time really matters a lot. And I was okay, but be careful, be mindful what you're using right now. This potentially could be a deal breaker for yourselves. So final verdict, guys. I do think the controller is actually very comfortable. Now, depending on your hand size, you might actually not like this shape, but I think adjusting the grip a little bit was not an issue at all. So I don't think it will be a big issue for a lot of people. But if you are really, used to an Xbox controller, just be mindful that there will be an adjustment period coming to this controller. Responsiveness, man, this controller definitely feels really responsive. The game time I've had on it absolutely was really great. I have to say, didn't feel like the controller was lacking or anything like that. So definitely when it comes to performance, the responsiveness of the controller is really good. Now, no trigger stops can be a deal breaker for some, but at this price point, I don't even know any controllers with trigger stops at like £40 and 2 back buttons and Hall effect sticks. So it's something that we are still waiting for, but at least we have some software options. So that's there. And then we have the audio that's coming out of the 3.5mm port. It's a little bit quieter than the standard controller and the Elite Series 2. Of course, I don't expect it to compete with the Elite Series 2, which seems to have the best on Xbox platform. Only the Raikiri and eSwap X sort of come close to it. But yeah, that's another thing that you have to consider. Also, I couldn't get the mic monitoring to work. I'm hoping it's just my unit or my machine. That's not a problem. But that's a big feature that if it's not working, that can be a potential problem. And then the last thing is that stick output. Now, that's up to you to decide if that's going to be a deal breaker for you. I was able to adjust to it pretty easily. And, my gaming experience was absolutely perfect with the controller, I have to say. But that is there. So if you are someone who is used to any of the other third-party Hall effect controllers that seems to be doing that linear output, this one is behaving a little bit differently. And like I showed the graphs, it feels very much like the standard Xbox controller. So that's something that you have to bear in mind, that it might be an adjustment thing depending on which controller you are coming from. For me personally, I think 8bitdo's entry in the licensed Hall effect controller is a good one, and I do hope that they can somehow give us the option of that output that's coming out of the sticks, that maybe we can adjust it, or give us a linear output option, something even with an outer dead zone if they decide to do that, as long as it doesn't harm the responsiveness of the controller. I am up for it. I think that would be a great option. But yeah, that's everything for me, guys. I do hope that I covered everything that you were looking for. If I missed anything, please do leave me a comment. I do my best to reply to every comment I get. And thank you so much for everybody who subscribed. Your support really means a lot. And thanks a lot for watching this video. Hopefully, I'll catch you in one of my other videos. Bye for now.